everyone. Welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host, Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here with our preview for the 2023-2024 season for number 12, Nebraska. The Cornhuskers are coming off a improved year, which maybe is not saying a whole lot since they've been not an abject failure under Fred Hoiberg, but certainly not very good. But they finally looked semi-decent last season. They were 16-16 for the season, so no losing record. They were 9-11 in the Big Ten, which was easily the most wins that they've had under Fred Hoiberg in the Big Ten. That might be as many wins as he's had in the Big Ten.
Collectively, it might be.
Yeah, they've been usually winning two
close.
or three. So they were number 94 in Ken Pom, and they were actually a fun team to watch, especially with the emergence of Tominaga. They have a good crowd, and it seems like a pretty good basketball atmosphere in Lincoln. They still had struggled last year, obviously, because they were 9-11. They had problems with turnovers, 3-point shooting, but they were pretty decent inside the arc, 54th in Ken Pom, and they were on defensively better than they've been. They were 69th overall, and they were able to defend without fouling a lot, which is put them as 6th in Ken Pom free throw attempts per in relation to field goal attempts. And they were decent everywhere else, I guess, is probably which for them was a huge improvement. They weren't anywhere near the bubble to getting in the tournament, but they've had a pretty good run. They were 7-4 non-conference play, and they managed to beat a bunch of Power 5 opponents, including Creighton, and then ended the Big Ten season 6-2, largely on, like I mentioned, Tominaga and his play and sort of his emergence, and also Fred Hoiberg's son's emergence in the team too. And so, I guess the question, you obviously have them ranked 12th, so not very high in the Big Ten, pretty much where I think last year they finished a little higher than that. I can't remember exact finish, but yeah. So not as good, but better. They seem to at least have a trajectory that looks somewhat positive, at least as of last season.
Absolutely. And by picking them 12th doesn't mean that I think it's impossible they could finish, several spots higher. They could.
Sure.
It's funny because you look at a lot of these areas and say, well, God, they were only one win away from being a 500 team in the league. And,
yeah,
they were decent defensively, all of that. But and the 3 non-conference wins over Power 5 opponents, and Creighton being a legitimately good one, but they still weren't close to being a tournament team. And I think the reason for that is that 9-11 record is slightly deceptive in that they didn't really beat anybody who was really good. And the fact is the Big Ten didn't have a lot of really good teams. Right. They had Purdue, and then, several teams, Michigan State being one of them, who were good, but not great in terms of their profile. Whereas if you go back, 2 years prior, the COVID year, if you went 9-11 in the Big Ten, you would have had to have beaten some really good teams to win that many games, because there was that much depth in terms of high quality. And when I say high quality, I'm talking about things like the metric systems, but there were so many high quality teams that you almost couldn't help but have some pretty impressive scalps if you got 9 of them, but look, all said and done, real progress for the first time of the Fred Hoiberg era, which I have freely admitted I have been dead wrong about. I thought this was a spectacular hire when they made it, because I looked at it and I said, this guy did really good work at Iowa State. He's got more resources at Nebraska. This will be great for them. And it's been anything but finally he found the right combination. Now he lost enough from this team and this also factors into where I have them picked, that It's no done deal. They're able to repeat it. But I do think if you're a Nebraska fan, for the first time since he got hired, you're allowed to feel optimistic about what this season could be. And look, there's a possibility. There's definitely a path where if things break really, really well for them, could they be a team that gets their way onto the bubble? Yeah, that wouldn't totally shock me. I'm not expecting it, but if enough things break the right way, yeah. It's not like we're talking about Minnesota, where you look at it, you
Right.
say, boy, this just seems impossible.
To your point with the Big Ten, when you're 12th, you're in that area where you move up 2 or 3 spots. I mean, when you're ninth in the Big Ten, you're in the conversation, most likely,
Most likely,
of at least on the
yes.
bubble, right? I
Yep.
mean, there's an
Yep.
opportunity for you to get
That's
there.
exactly what I mean. That kind of
Yeah.
scenario.
And moving up 3 spots from 12th to ninth is probably only 2 more wins in the Big Ten. It's
Yep.
not like, a massive difference.
Yeah. But again, it's also going to matter who you beat. And
Sure.
can they
Right.
repeat that non-conf? Even with those 3 Power 5 wins, they were still only 7-4 in non-conference. So can they be, 9-2 and still have those Power 5 wins, still beat Creighton, those kind of things. That would be the scenario whereby you could see Nebraska getting into the mix. And then again, it will probably matter who you beat in conference play.
Right.
If those 9 wins are coming from, they swept Minnesota, they swept Penn State, they got Michigan once, they got I
Some
don't
home
know.
wins against some
Yeah,
middling
not
teams.
much
Yeah.
on the road. That stuff can mean, it doesn't mean as much as you might think.
Right. And what they do in non-conference obviously matters too.
Yep.
All right. So before we go on to the players who are leaving the team, I just want to remind everyone that we do have our Big Ten contest, Get the Beat Rod contest. If you can predict the Big Ten final standings better than him, 1 through 14, you can win a hoodie at the end of the season, and you got nothing to lose. It's just send an email to me at eric@tiffnots.com. They're just with your list of 1 through 14. The tiebreaker will be how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan this season. Remember, they're playing them twice. So how many points Michigan State scores. And we actually had to use a tiebreaker last year. So if you want to had an opportunity to win that shirt, you can feel free to send out an email to me. That has to be in before Michigan State, any Big Ten teams play their first Big Ten game. So if you want to wait to see how people are looking, which is what most people did last year, which is why they were able to predict Purdue much higher than I think you had originally in the season. They saw sort of what was coming down the tracks, so to speak. So you can wait, but it has to be in before Big Ten play begins in whenever it is in December, like the 7th or something like that. All right, so let's talk about the players who are departing the Huskers this year. Number 1, Derek Walker. He's a big loss, obviously, for the team. He was the 6'9" player who was a big presence in paint, who was very good, consistent, low post scorer. He averaged 13.6 points a game, a little over 7 rebounds a game, which were tops for the Huskers, and shot 58% from the floor. So he obviously will be greatly missed.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things he did exceptionally well. He finished around the rim, which was a big deal, and he knew who he was. You didn't see him,
Right.
take threes, or he played within his capabilities. And he was also a really good passer for a big man. They ran a lot of, Nebraska didn't, although it was the best point guard play I think they've had in the Hoiberg era, that doesn't mean it was great. So it helped that they had an alternate ways to run offense, and they could run offense through Derek Walker out of the post. So he's a major loss. I mean, he was a really high caliber player for them. And, it's unfortunate that the league was stacked with so many great big men because he very much got lost in the shuffle. But he was really good the last 2 years.
And so next would be Sam Griesel. He was the grad transfer, 6'6" player who came in to work as point. He averaged 12 points a game on 45, 32, and 68 shooting. Led the team in assists. Also pulled down almost 6 rebounds a game. He was a very good contributor and one of the keys to them actually playing well, since they were not as discombobulated in offense as they had been the previous couple seasons.
He was kind of like, he wasn't nearly as good as Pickett at Penn State, but it was somewhat of a similar effect in that they had this big physical guy who could run offense. Now, again, as I said, he wasn't a great point guard in that way, but he was better than what they'd had in the past. And you look at the total contributions. I mean, 12 points a game, almost 6 boards a game, leads the team in assists. That's solid defensively. I mean, that's giving you contributions in a lot of areas. And the biggest thing was that, the Hoiberg era, such as it is, had been marked by just wild, out of control play at the point.
Yeah.
He had guys, seemed every year he'd have he'd come up with a new guy in the portal who was very athletic, and showed talent, quote unquote, but couldn't ever control it. Griesel played largely under control, and that alone was a big step in the right direction. So they'll miss him as well. The only thing he really didn't do very well is shoot the three.
And so one of the big losses is Emmanuel Bandemel, and big loss just because, man, I love his name. So Emmanuel Bandemel is a 6'4" grad transfer. He averaged 8.4 points a game and 4.8 rebounds a game, shot 36, 22, and 75. He was a good defender, but obviously he's really struggled from deep. But he's pretty good inside the arc and was a pretty good scorer for Nebraska.
Yeah, he definitely was a guy they liked. And yet it's funny. After he got hurt, you would have thought that would have been a big blow. They had two guys go down. He and Juwan Gary, who played very well at the power forward, got hurt roughly around the same time. And you would think for a team that wasn't going all that well at that stage anyway, that would be the death knell. Instead, they got better. That's when they went on that 6-2 run. So they'll hope that they won't miss him that much. But he did make contributions, again, specifically on the defensive end.
Next departure is Wilhelm Breidenbach, 6'10", redshirt freshman. He was pretty good. He had those big, thick glasses, kind of Coke bottle glasses.
Yeah.
He played the 4 and the 5.
He stood out visually, that's for sure.
He was all Wilhelm. There's no question. He fit his name.
Yeah.
He averaged 3.6 points a game, 2.7 rebounds a game, shot 39, 23, and 61. He elected to transfer to another Big Ten school, Washington. So we may see him again in the future.
We'll see him back. That's right. That was it was a weird one. He was a Southern California kid. So when Nebraska got him 2 years ago, it was kind of, it seemed strange, but maybe not in the new Big Ten where that is Big Ten country. But he was, they've got other big guys, so it's not a huge blow, but I liked him in the role he was in. He obviously needed to shoot the ball much better, but he'd kind of get in there and he was a little bit, ungainly in terms of the way with a big body, so he can kind of muck things up. He's one of those guys that you'd actually, if you were rooting for the opposing team, you'd actually be a little bit worried that he might, not even with intent, injure one of your players.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But there's a value to that for some teams. So a loss.
And the next would be Denham Dawson, athletic 6'7" freshman. He averaged 1.7 points a game on 1.8 rebounds a game. He's leaving for Tennessee State. So like many of these transfers out, it sort of where they end up kind of shows you where they think they were, where they ended up, where they belonged in the Big Ten or not. And he's obviously the one who thought he probably needed to go down a level or two.
It does. Yep.
Next would be Oleg Kognets, 7-footer. He only played 62 minutes in 18 games, and he is heading out west to Wyoming. Oh, not that far west, I guess, Nebraska.
Yeah, again, a big, didn't play a lot. And then he hits the portal and ends up Wyoming, which is, a transfer down. Tells you something about how he was viewed on the open market, so to speak, right?
Yeah. He's one of those fives that, Michigan State could have gotten the year before. Like, there's so many fives, you just get someone to fill that spot, right?
Right.
And finally, the last departing player is Quarren McPherson, a wing. He redshirted last year, so didn't play, and he's heading to Northern Illinois to complete his college career.
Again, so he transfers to the MAC level. Probably makes sense for him to have an opportunity. And for some of these guys too, I'll tell you what, and you're already seeing it, but I think we will continue to see it. It's worth mentioning. So a guy like McPherson, he redshirts, he doesn't play. He transfers down to the MAC level. If he has a good year this year or as a sophomore, he could very easily transfer back up. And we'll see that.
Would you have to be a grad transfer, though, at this point?
Well, you do, or you get the waiver. You get the waiver, though. And granted, the NCAA has been hesitant to hand waivers out, which is surprising. But okay, let's say as a senior, you will see these kind of phenomenons where guys transfer out, go down to a lower level, figure it out, play well, and maybe get an opportunity to transfer back up.
Yeah. And you can graduate certainly earlier too, since you redshirted, right?
For sure.
So you could only play 2 years at Northern Illinois and then play a third year. somewhere else
Right.
after you graduate, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Before we get to the returning players, just want to remind you to check out the people who make our gear and who make our t-shirts and our hoodies. You can get those at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/merchandise. It leads you to a Nudge Printing. All the proceeds go to our show, but they are a fantastic printer. Michigan State alumni run that. You can't get better quality. They're fantastic, as I've mentioned before many times. Multiple washes. The shirts look just like new. They're super soft, very breathable, comfortable. I wore that hoodie during the season, during my free throw competition, and it helped me win the free throw competition. I'm not saying that the shirt is what led me to victory, but I'm saying these hoodies might have powers that you're not familiar with. And so it's probably worth trying. And, who knows what you could do with that hoodie. So check out Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. They've got all kinds of other Spartan gear, obviously, and other teams in the state of Michigan outside of Ann Arbor. You get 20% off your order if you go type in Final Four into the coupon code at checkout. All right, so returning players. This really comes down to the one who's probably the most beloved, unless you have to go up against him, is Keisei Tominaga. He was super popular when it was the Big Ten tournament. I mean, everyone just loved this guy just because he's totally crazy. I mean, he's, as you written down here, he's entertaining and maddening at the same time, probably for both teams, for Nebraska too, right? 6'2" guard, shot 40% from the field, from three, 50% from the field, and a guy who will have a twitchy trigger, right? He'll shoot anywhere, falling sideways, wherever, and he tends to hit a lot of them. I mean, hit 40% with that kind of crazy shooting, but this is very much like the guy from Penn State. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Andrew Funk.
Andrew Funk. I mean, they're very similar in the sense that, although in the sense of their shot selection, the only difference is I think he's got more flair and sort of personality, charisma, and really plays up the crowd and things like that. He's very much more a showman than Funk was. Funk was more sort of businesslike in his crazy shots. And the one thing I would say also with Tominaga is that near the end of the season, he was using the shot fake and ability to go in and go for two, because you're forced to guard the guy, 25, 30 feet out of the floor. And he started using that to his advantage to get some layups and things like that. So he averaged 13.1 points a game, like I mentioned, 40 and 87 shooting. And, he's coming back. And so there was some question at the end of the season, but Nebraska has to be thrilled that he's going to be back to be the cornerstone for this team next year.
Yeah, I think you touched on the big difference. His improved efficiency from three led to his being much more effective from two, because defenses extended out on the floor against him, and he was able to get inside and finish. And so 50% from the floor overall is a hell of a number for a guard.
Yeah.
It's really good. And if you look at his volume, he took a lot of threes, but he also took a lot of twos. He wasn't one of these guys that was, 85% of his shots come from three. That was not Tominaga. So he really became an efficient and effective offensive weapon for a team that desperately needed it. But for that to continue, he's got to remain as efficient from three as he was last season. That's where it all starts. Because if he's going out there and shooting 32% from three, teams to some extent are going to let him do that. And they're going to look to take away the drive and just let him take bad shots. And he does take bad shots. He takes a ton of them, like objectively bad shots. But when they fall, what can you do? And he's another one of these guys. I mentioned it when we were talking about Funk in the Penn State episode. The hard part as a team playing him is because he doesn't function conventionally as a shooter in terms of his shot selection, it's very difficult to defend him, because situations where a normal player would not take a shot, he will. And you want to contest it, and it can be difficult figuring that out, how he plays, because it's so unconventional. But again, what I return to with him, it's pretty simple. If he can be anywhere near that efficient shooting from three again, then all the rest of the elements to his offensive game come back into the fray. If he struggles for some reason this year, it could be a different story. And the only reason I'm hesitating is his shot selection is so weird that it wouldn't totally shock me if he came out and he shot 32% this year from three.
Right. Yeah. Was last year an anomaly, or is this something
Right.
that, yeah, for sure. And I feel like with him, you have to have someone who's pretty athletic, so they have to be able to get out to him, face guard him, and then also be able to be prepared to, reverse course and head and prevent him from getting downhill towards the basket as well. So it's a unique sort of defender. You have to have ability to guard him. So the next returning player is Juwan Gary. I'm so proud of myself I didn't say Juwan Howard. He's a 6'7" power forward, transferred in from Alabama last year, was healthy, and then, as you mentioned just previously, he got hurt near the end of the season. He was averaging 9.5 points a game and 6.5 rebounds a game, shooting 43, 26, and 62. So he missed basically the last half of the season, last 15 games. But he's definitely defensively someone they definitely could use, and something they hadn't had in the past.
He really gave them a defensive presence and a rebounding presence at that spot, and that's been a problem in the Hoiberg era. So if he's back and playing similarly this season, he will help. Even if the shooting doesn't improve. I mean, that 26% from three, you don't love, but he limits how many of those he takes. It's not a major problem, I don't think. But what he gives them in the grit areas is really important.
Yeah, and the one thing that Nebraska seems to have struggled with until last year, they were been really abysmal on the boards, and so they definitely got a lot better last year, which is probably half the reason, at least, that they won 9 games versus the previous seasons. Next would be C.J. Wilcher, 6'5" junior, averaged 8 points a game on 40, 31, and 64 shooting. He became a reserve role later in the season, but probably will be a starter this year, depending on things. And 31%, not great shooting from deep, but can he knock that up a little bit? And that's going to be, I suppose, one of his tickets to play more minutes.
It will, and they need him to be better. And when they recruited him, they thought he'd be better than this. So I think a big key for Wilcher and his role is, can he unlock another level to his jump shooting? If he can, then he can be very much a fixture and a major part of this team. But they need him to do that.
The next player would be Jamarcus Lawrence, 6'3" sophomore. His role expanded last year as he became a starter. He averaged only 5 points a game on 41, 37, and 39 shooting, so obviously low volume for those. But showed that he was competent out there and was a positive in the rotation.
Yeah, look, I like Lawrence a lot. When they were on that 6-2 streak, he was playing very, very well for Nebraska. I think he's got potential to be an excellent defensive player, and I think he could be a good shooter. I expect him to push for a starting role, and if he doesn't earn that, I think he'll still play a lot of minutes. What they want to see is that he becomes more of a scoring presence for them. But I think there's a decent chance that could happen. I think he can also help some on the ball, too. I'm not sure he's actually a point guard, but I think he's capable of helping some there as well.
And so next would be Sam Hoiberg. Coach's son, former walk-on, 6-footer, was, because of injury, was forced to play, and I don't know if he was starting, but he was playing a lot more at the end of the season. And although he only averaged 4.1 points a game on 55, 41, and 82 shooting, that's actually not a very good reflection of what he was, especially his effectiveness scoring at the end of the season. He was probably averaging much more than that. And he had a stretch probably of, I want to say, during that 6-2 stretch where he was very good. And the very end of the season, like maybe the last game or two, maybe the Big Ten tournament, they look like he didn't look as good. I guess I'll just say that. And I'm not quite sure which Sam Hoiberg is the one that is going to be around next year. I'm not sure if it's the one who's really good or not.
Look, they've added a lot of guards, so I think that tells you something about how they see it. But at the same time, you shoot 41% from three, 55% overall. That says something. And we'll see. I think, look, it comes down to this. If they still find themselves in situations where they need somebody to come in and make some shots, then he's probably got a rotation role, at least at the start of the year, because he did it last year successfully. So that much, I think, is we know. How well that translates into production over this season remains to be seen. But I think if they need more shooting, he's got a chance.
Blaise Keita, 6'11 junior, would be the next player. He averaged 2 points a game and 3.5 rebounds a game in just 10 minutes. He played in 21 games overall. And he didn't have a huge role last year. And I guess the question would be, what he's going to do this season if he's still going to be a backup.
Well, I think they think he's got the potential to be an effective backup this year. He was last season when he played. I mean, 3.5 rebounds a game in just 10 minutes is pretty good. And you can't teach size, as they say. So he's a presence physically, defensively, and as a rebounder. And that's probably all they're going to ask for around him. And, finish plays that might come to him around the rim. And they think that there's actually the potential for more than that down the line. But for this year, I think they'd take, an effective 12, 15 minutes, maybe move up a little bit from last year in terms of his playing time, and just kind of hold the fort down defensively and on the boards.
Finally, Ramel Lloyd, 6'6", redshirt freshman. He's a guy who, the Huskers hope has a lot more potential and can play on and off the ball.
It's interesting. Even when those injuries we talked about hit, they decided not to take the red shirt off him. And he was, by Nebraska standards, he was a fairly highly regarded high school player. He's out of Southern California. They think that extra eligibility will be valuable to him down the line. I don't. It's weird because we're in an environment where the idea of redshirting anybody seems insane. With the transfer portal, I mean, this idea that you're going to have a guy stay 4 years is tough enough. Now you're saying 5? That just seems crazy. But nevertheless, that's what they did. And they do think he's got the potential to help both on and off the ball. So I would expect he'll have a shot at getting into the rotation this year. We'll see how much of a role he's able to earn.
Right. And before we talk about the newcomers to the Huskers, just want to remind you that if you have gutter work you need done, the brothers at Just Do Gutters are fantastic professionals. They will take care of all that. They are tradesmen who just do gutters. They don't do anything else, which means they specialize in it and do fantastic work at an affordable price, quick, fully insured, and they'll do all the things you don't want to do. They'll clean out your gutters. They'll replace your gutters. They'll repair them. They'll put on the leaf guards so you don't have to be clearing them out all the time. They're the guys who get up on the ladder so you don't have to, and they'll come and do that quickly. We have coverage in the west side of the state, the Grand Rapids area, out to the Lakeshore, and all the way out in the east side in the Detroit metro area by Greg and his team. You can find links to that at thebrothersgutters.com, or you can just go find links to that in the podcast player, or if you're watching this on YouTube, and get a hold of them, 10% off if you mentioned Final Four in your request. You won't regret it. They do incredible work, and we have a contest giving away free nudge printing things. I don't know what we could do giving away free gutters or something like that. But if we could, they're all game for it. So anyway, let's talk about newcomers for the season for the Huskers. We'll start with Rienk Mast, 6'9", 240-pound transfer from Bradley. He was someone they really needed, and he's very good. He averaged 13.8 points a game and 8 rebounds a game in the Missouri Valley. He played for NCAA tournament team. He shot 52, 35, and 74. I actually, since I watch a little bit Missouri Valley basketball, just because my dad's team is Drake, I watched him play a couple times, and he's very good. And he also is a pretty good guy, passer too. He averaged almost 2.5 assists a game.
Yeah, I think he seems, you've seen more of him than I have, but I think on paper, he seems almost a perfect replacement, assuming he can produce at anything close to the same levels that he did at Bradley. I will say, we're always concerned about how guys translate when they come up a level into the Big Ten. But when you've played in the Missouri Valley is a really good league. It's generally teams are well coached. You have hostile road environments. I mean, there are a lot of things that I think translate to the Big Ten. So I'm bullish on him, maybe not 14-8, but I think he'll produce. And the fact that he's a good passer means they have that option again, at least in theory, of running offense through a big. So, I mean, you saw him play more than I did. Do you think what he does translates? I
mean, he was the best player on Bradley's team, and he is he's a guy you absolutely can play through. He just makes smart decisions. He's very talented, skilled, and moves pretty well. And I think I don't know that he's going to be like Walker in the sense that he's probably not going to be that. He plays differently, but I think he's definitely a guy you can rely on. And I don't think he'll have any problems playing in the Big Ten. There's some players you think they're small or there's some sort of aspect of that they succeed because of the level they're playing at. I don't think he's going to have any trouble. I think he'll blend in pretty well, and you won't notice or even know that he was not a Big Ten player before.
Okay.
So next we'll talk about Brice Williams, 6'7" wing transfer from Charlotte. He averaged 13.8 points a game and 5.3 rebounds a game, shooting 48, 40, and 84 with a relatively high 3-point volume. So he's obviously one of the shooters that Hoiberg's bringing in to be alongside Tominaga, so you have more than just one threat out there outside the arc.
Coming from Charlotte, so Conference USA, again, it's somewhat similar to what we just said about Mast. Mm-hmm. That's a decent enough league that I have a little more faith. Again, I don't know that I expect 14-5, but I think Williams has a chance to produce at the Big Ten level. And he's a really, really important player for them to get because they need to find some scoring and some shooting to pair with Tominaga. And this guy's got a chance to do it. I mean, 40% from three on a relatively high volume. So he's an efficient shooter. At 6'7", he's got good size. They think he can be a solid defensive player. I think he's hugely important. A lot of the season comes down to, in my opinion, how good Mast and Williams are. Are they legit Big Ten quality starters at their positions? If they are, Nebraska can surprise to the upside.
Next, we'll go to one of my wife's most frustrating players last season for her Hawkeyes, Aaron Eulis, 6'3" senior, transfer from the Hawkeyes. He averaged 6.1 points a game on 40, 32, and 70 when shooting. He had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. But of course, the big thing as of the recording, there were problems with gambling, both at the Hawkeyes and Iowa State. And he has been sort of subject to a criminal gambling probe in the state of Iowa. And it's unclear, what will happen. There's a good chance that this get by Nebraska will end up being gotten, that he will not be able to play maybe ever again in college basketball because he was allegedly gambling on games that he was participating in.
Yep, and that's a big problem, to say the least. Yeah, and he's not the last guy we're going to talk about in these previews that has been implicated in this. Although, interestingly, at least as of today, as we record this in late August, as of today, nobody on Iowa's current roster. But obviously, Eulis was there last year. Look, they brought him in to be the starting point guard, and he would have been, I think, a decent option. He wasn't great at Iowa.
No,
but
not at all.
You don't necessarily need him to be great. You just need competence at that position for Nebraska, and I think he could have given them that. But it looks unlikely to me that he's going to play. So consequently, they went out and they got the next guy we'll talk about.
And that next guy is 6'5" grad transfer from Ball State, Jaron Coleman. He averaged 14.3 points a game on 38, 35, and 78 shooting last year. Grabbed a little under 5 rebounds a game and had 3.8 assists per game to 2.2 turnovers a game. So a little less than 2-to-1 average.
Yeah, and I think it's likely he's going to spend a lot of time on the ball. You like that size. That also means he can play off the ball if they need him to at times. But I think he's going to come in and job one is going to be try to win that point guard spot. The interesting thing here is this isn't just a guy who transferred up from the MAC. It's kind of what I was alluding to a little earlier. Yeah. He started his career at Missouri, and he had 21 starts there. He averaged 8.6 points along with 2.8 assists per game. So there's reason to think that Jaron, and that was a younger Jaron Coleman, so there's reason to think that his game can translate. I'll say this, if he can shoot at the same levels he did at Ball State, then you've got a very reasonable facsimile in some ways of what Sam Griesel gave this team. Decent rebounding, playmaking, and respectable enough shooting that you got to guard him. and size at the position.
Next would be Josiah Alec, 6'8" power forward transferring from New Mexico. He averaged 8.4 points a game and 7.3 rebounds a game while shooting 56, 16, and 67. So obviously 3-point shooting is not where you're going to get any value from him, but the other aspects of his game.
Yeah, and I think this is important, and it shows you where Hoiberg believes he's at, because you add a kid like Alec, he's primarily, I think, going to be the backup behind Gary, but a high quality backup, or at least a chance to be that. I mean, 8.4 points, 7.3 boards at New Mexico is decent production. And if he's your backup four-man, you're in decent shape. That's something that I think, is oftentimes the problem that lower echelon Big Ten teams have. They might actually have some capable starters, but it's the lack of depth. It's when they've got to go to the bench and what their second string big looks like versus Michigan State's second string big. It's those situations. So adding a guy like Alec, I think, really helps. And some of the, just in general, what Hoiberg's been able to do this offseason, I think he's got a better chance at having a truly competitive rotation as opposed to, well, he's got some good starters.
Well, finally, and I guess this is the only actual high school recruit that Nebraska has come in, is Eli Rice, 6'7" wing hybrid, 3-4 guy from Tennessee, played at IMG last year. And so, he's, like I said, he's their only high school player.
Yeah, and they like his potential. They think he can be a versatile, maybe a 3-4 guy, play some wing, play inside some. They like his versatility, but I don't expect Rice to play much this year.
And finally, Matar Diop, he's 6'9", native of Senegal. He's a late addition, just joined the Nebraska class as we're recording this in late July. And so he's, again, an intriguing prospect, but that's all he is at this point.
Yeah, it's good physical tools, needs a lot of development. They beat out Ole Miss, among others, for him. I think with Mast and Keita already on hand, unless there are injuries, it's not likely that Diop is in the rotation as a freshman, but he's a guy that they're kind of taking a flyer on. They can develop, and he can help them down the line.
All right. So overall, the Husker team looks more put together than they have in the past. They certainly have some momentum from last season. They have some pieces that are encouraging with Tominaga and Gary, and I think some high level transfers. Like I said, I think Mast and Williams, like you mentioned, out of Charlotte. They have some pieces that you think could hurt you, especially when you head into Lincoln. Obviously predicted 12th, but that's all. The difference between 12th and 8th might not be much. So where do you see this whole class? And I guess then the larger question after that is, what do you think about Hoiberg? Like, where's this thing going? Is he going to be around a while? What are your feelings on that?
All right, let's start with this team. So I do like the potential for this team, and they certainly have the potential to make me look foolish by picking them 12th. If Tominaga is as efficient as he was last season, that's a really tough cover.
Yep.
I think Gary and Lawrence are both guys who give them a grit they haven't always had. And Lawrence, I think in particular, has the potential to be a really good guard. And I think Wilcher still has potential too. He's just got to find consistency with that jumper. And then you look at that portal class, and as I mentioned, I think Mast and Williams are really important additions. And if those guys are good, Nebraska's really cooking at that point. Then you've got, potential, and you add in Coleman as your probable starter at the point. It would be interesting. They would be, and Coleman's important too, because with Tominaga and Lawrence, you have two somewhat smaller guards, 6'2" and 6'3". So having a 6'5" guy at the point would help. Now, Williams probably will start on the wing as well, I guess, instead of Lawrence, and he's 6'7". Mm-hmm. So they can have the potential to have some decent length on this team. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I also think that you look at these pieces they've assembled, and I can much more easily than in any year previous to this, I can see how Oh yeah, he could have a credible 8-man rotation or 9-man rotation, and that's a big deal. That's something you need in part to withstand injury, foul trouble in certain games, but also just to make sure that you've got some real depth. So
Mm-hmm.
even though I don't see a tournament bid as likely for this team, they can get into that discussion if enough things break the right way, and it's not asking for something crazy to happen. Um, if they can be somewhere around where they were defensively last season, then what it's really going to come down to is, can they find more consistent offense? And I think there's enough here to suggest that they might be able to do that. So that's how I see this team. Fred Hoiberg in general, boy, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Um,
That's why I ask you the tough
if they
questions, because
don't, yeah, right,
he was the transfer portal guy, right? I mean,
yeah.
this seemed like the perfect situation. He's in a place which, I mean, it certainly
Well,
wasn't as
keep
good
in
as Iowa
mind
State, right?
when he was at Iowa State, and even his first couple of years at Nebraska, his first year, the portal didn't exist. He did all that work at Iowa State under the old transfer rules, which were tougher to work with.
Yeah.
And yet he really had success with it. It just hadn't worked at Nebraska until last year. You look at some of the additions he made. I thought the additions he brought in that portal class last year, I think in retrospect, looks pretty damn good. When
Mm-hmm.
you added, you added Greasel, which was important. Bandamel helped before he got hurt. And then, Juwan Gary was effective. Um, that's not a bad haul. Now, will this year's group repeat that? I actually think this year's group has a chance to collectively be better than
Yeah,
that
I
one
agree.
was. Because I think Mast could be really effective. I think Williams could be really effective. And I think Coleman can be at least respectable. And then a guy like Alec, I think, gives them the kind of experience and proven production at a decent level, Nebraska Mountain West school, um, that suggests that it will help lengthen Nebraska's bench. I mean, if Nebraska's rotation has, let's say, and um, Alec, Lawrence, and Wilcher all coming off the bench, that's 8 quality guys. Keita as a backup big is 9. And then somebody like Hoiberg, Ramel Lloyd as your 10th, 11th guys. That's not a terrible looking group.
Yeah.
So there's potential there. I don't know what it all means for his long-term future there. I definitely think if they'd had another just absolute garbage season last year, maybe they decide to start over.
Yeah.
But
That was what I was thinking. But now
yeah,
you feel he's bought himself some time.
he bought himself another year. The flip side to it is Nebraska is one of these places like Penn State, where Northwestern, where you can kind of tread water for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and you last a lot longer than you would at places that are really serious about it. I think Nebraska would like to have a competitive basketball program. You look at the money they've spent on their arena, their facilities, all those things are great. They spent a good amount of money to hire Fred Hoiberg. So it's not accurate to say, oh, they don't care. I think they'd like to be good. I'm not sure they need to be good. They need to be good in football. You know,
Right.
I don't know that they need to be good in basketball, and that might be the problem. But it also means it might be the thing that gives Fred Hoiberg a little more of a leash on life. We will see. Um, I think they've got enough potential that, look, it'll be interesting to see if you're Nebraska and say Fred Hoiberg gets them to 10-10 in the league, and they miss out on a tournament bid, but they go to the NIT. Is that enough that it brings him back for another year? Would Nebraska fire a guy based on that? I don't know. I mean, they did fire Tim Miles, and Tim Miles actually got him to a tournament once.
Right.
His
Yeah.
his program, the trajectory, his problem was he started out really well, and then it just started slipping.
Yeah.
Hoiberg, if he can put a good year together this season, he would have the opposite trajectory, which is probably better. So I think it's a key year though. The only hesitation I have in saying that he might be on the hot seat is it's Nebraska. And I don't know how much. At some point it'll be too much and he keeps losing, but I don't know. I honestly don't expect them to be as god awful as they were during those first 3-4 years.
It's pretty hard to be that bad. And they certainly have too much talent, you think, on this team. I mean, outside of like multiple injuries throughout the team.
Right.
And, you know.
And those kind of things could be excused perhaps, but yeah, they shouldn't be that bad.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there for Nebraska. Cornhuskers is coming at number 12. I'd recommend that you check out our support page. If you like what we're doing and love talking Michigan State basketball, listening to it, make sure you connect your friends with our show as well to increase the size of the Spartan community listening to the show. We really appreciate that. You've helped us grow a ton, tremendously, in the last just year and a half. So if you want to support us other ways to help keep the show on the air too, you can go to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. There you can find ways of giving one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis through Patreon. And there are different levels there. You can get various rewards for being part of Patreon. Also, if you're interested in being part of the show on a sponsor as like a business or you want to drop a note to a friend or something like that, you can always send me a message at eric@tiffknots.com and we can try and set something up. So again, check out Nudge Printing. Check out the Brothers Just Two Gutters. They're fantastic sponsors for the show. And next stop will be number 11 Northwestern. And until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green. Thank you.